Welcome to Lyric Lab Poetry. My name is Martin Jago, and in this video we'll be asking a question that many poets, especially young poets and young writers, ask themselves. That is, to MFA or not to MFA? Should I do a creative writing master's? Now, before we get to that in any meaningful way, there's this silliness to share with you. To MFA or not to MFA? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous editors, or to take arms against a sea of academics and by enrolling end them. To draft, to write, no more. And by a write we mean to end the heartache and the 1,000 rejections that poets are heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To draft, to write perchance to publish. Aye, there's the rub, for in that degree what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this freelance coil must give us pause. There is the cost, you see, that makes calamity of such tuition. Are you thinking about doing a creative writing master's program? Are you wondering whether it's really worth the time, effort, and frankly the money? As a graduate of the University of Oxford's Creative Writing Master's Program, I want to respond with some of my own ideas and thoughts and share with you some of my experiences. What exactly is an MFA and how is it different to an MA? The answer, I think, lies in theory versus practice. If you're studying a Master of Arts in music, for example, you will be studying a lot of music theory, learning about famous composers, understanding and approaching the history of music, and also across cultures as well. Whereas if you're doing an MFA in music, you would probably be learning to play an instrument most of the time and practicing that skill and developing the skill and your strengths in that area, learning from masters in the field. And that's exactly the distinction between a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing and, let's say, for example, a Master of Arts in English Literature. You are studying writers, yes, that is true, and there's a lot of reading and there is some essay writing, but the primary focus is on developing your skills through practice, developing your skills as a writer. Who typically applies for a master's program in creative writing? Well, there's an odd contradiction that I've often wondered about. Why is it? Because we can all count to 10 on the fingers of two hands. We aren't all rushing out to apply for the Master of Arts in, I don't know, quantum physics at the University of Oxford, if one exists. And yet, conversely, because we can all hold a pen between the fingers of those same hands, we're all rushing out to apply for the Master of Arts in Creative Writing. The creative writing programs are often, and this is the case at Oxford, the most oversubscribed course in all of the university. Everyone likes the idea of being a writer and therefore thinks, yeah, I could do that. It's incredibly competitive. And so that's the first thing you have to understand if you're applying for a master's. You are going up against people that may have already published books or have been practicing the craft of writing for many years before getting to that application stage. I was one of the older people on my course and amazed at the fact that there were young students straight from their first degree program, straight into Oxford, straight into that program. My mind was blown because it took me so long to get to a point that I was ready to study at that level. And I, frankly, really enjoyed the experience, but we'll come to that in a short moment. The first thing to say is the people who typically apply are those who have been practicing the craft of writing for a long time. They might be aspiring novelists or poets or non-fiction writers or playwrights or screenwriters, and they are giving it their best shot in that application, just as we all are when we apply for a job or when we apply for a position or indeed a place at a premier university on a premier program. Let's talk about what's actually included in the MFA program. Typically, there's going to be a number of workshops, readings, a thesis, and then also mentorship, and then usually some kind of presentation at the end of your course where you read your work in front of maybe literary agents and publishers and so on and so forth. So the workshops at Oxford, as well as tutorials as well, because there's a tutorial system there where you are basically in a one-on-one situation with a tutor, looking at your thesis, looking at your essays, and looking at your creative writing. But a majority of the time is spent with your fellow students in workshops, and often those workshops are generative, getting you to produce new work, but also they are reflective. In other words, taking your work and reflecting on that honestly and openly in a group of peers, like-minded peers, all trying to achieve different things within their different disciplines, but all at a high level. And frankly, that is very challenging, but very rewarding at the same time, because ultimately, isn't the thing you're really there for to try and elevate your writing and bring it to a place where you think it might be ready or good for publication. I found the program at Oxford to be second to none. I just thought the experience was so rich and so brilliant and so well organized. They also fed us 3-4 times a day with 3-course meals, breakfast, lunch and dinner. And there were also tea breaks as well, very quaint in English. But throughout the day, we would take these pauses where we would gather together in the bar. Yes, every college has its own bar, but not to drink alcohol, certainly not at that time of day, but for a cup of coffee or tea, and then to chat with our fellow students, our peers within the cohort, and discuss what we were up to and why we were doing it, and to just reflect on the whole process of being there. It was a very intensive experience, but I think that, one could easily feel, I don't know whether I'm going to say that actually. I rise to the challenge of being in a room where everyone is smarter than me. That happens quite often, by the way. And so for me, it's something I relish, the idea that, well, there's something to aim for there, and I can really reach to improve myself, and with the help of these excellent people around you, become a better writer. Always the pragmatic approach, I think. Now, to talk about some of the pros of an MFA experience. Being in a program forces consistency. Having to hold your work up in front of other people does take a bit of courage, actually, but also it really helps you to hone your craft. You're going to have real critiques from working writers, and that's another thing I absolutely loved about being at Oxford, is that the people that were teaching you were not professors of English literature. I have nothing against professors of English literature, but first and foremost, these people, and many of them were also professors of English literature, but first and foremost, they were published working writers, and not just any published working writers. We had T.S. Eliot winning poets, we had groundbreaking novelists and non-fiction writers, screenwriters and playwrights that are highly regarded in their fields. Another really, really useful thing about the MFA program is that sense of community and network. Even to this day, many years after the program, I'm still in touch with fellow students from that program and still able to bounce ideas off them and share what I'm doing. And as a writer, often you do feel that what you're doing is, it's collaborative at the point when you start to workshop, but often you're here alone in your space working, and it can feel very isolating but also lonely. And that's why having that connection, that community is really important, and you will definitely get that on an MFA program. There is also academic and professional validation when you go to a program which is focused specifically in the area in which you are working or trying to work professionally or aspiring to work in professionally. Then that also carries some weight. For me, the Creative Writing Masters at Oxford gave me the space to focus, the mentorship that I needed and desired, but also the global cohort I now have to collaborate with and communicate with. So what might the downsides of studying on an MFA program in creative writing actually be? The first one has to be, of course, the expense. It can be extremely expensive, especially in the United States, to study. And to study on a creative writing program is no different. Are you ever going to make the money as a writer that you'll pour into your education? The answer is probably a resounding no. Number 2 on the list of possible downsides is, of course, there is no guaranteed career path. Just because you've gone to a premier university and studied on a fancy course doesn't mean you're going to get a job at the end of it. Number 3, some people claim that MFA programs flatten or homogenize the writer's voice. I didn't find that to be the case, so I push back against this, but I do understand where it comes from. This idea that one model fits all, and some programs will have a certain way of doing things or thinking about writing that is very prescriptive. In other words, you should definitely do it like this and not like that. There is, of course, another potential con here or downside, and that is the huge time commitment that you will need to give to any master's program. It's not something you should take lightly, and it will include a lot of work. But if you're like me, just really excited at the challenge and overjoyed at the acceptance. To get my hands on the reading list was wonderful. It meant that I could sit and read for hours and hours, and I had a perfect excuse. I was studying. And then to be in a situation where you're being given prompts or work to do, it doesn't really feel like work when you're writing, because it's the thing that you love most. So, but do bear in mind that actually if you have other commitments like a job or a family, then that is going to disrupt that balance, and you'll need to find a way to make it work for you. So let's now talk about alternatives, because an MFA is a huge financial and time investment, and there may be other ways you can strengthen your writing without having to jump in with both feet back into education. So the first thing is to say, look out for workshops in your local community. You may find workshops that are free and very good. I run a program here in Los Angeles at a local branch library. We meet once a week, and I find that both the poetry that's shared in that group and also the critique and feedback is absolutely invaluable. It's a kind of free editorial. It's exactly the kind of thing that an editor at a publishing house will be doing with you when you work on the final draft of your book and bring that towards publication. So don't underestimate the value of a really good local workshop. You might also explore courses online or at your local community college. There are plenty of courses out there, and this could be a way of kind of dipping your toe into the educational experience before you decide or make that final decision about whether to do an MFA program or not. So another very useful alternative. There are also a host of mentorships and fellowships available at the click of a few buttons. You can find those online and think about applying for that. There's another way of strengthening and honing your writing skills without having to do an MFA program. Do not feel for one moment that an MFA program is the only path to legitimacy. There are many, many writers out there, very successful, practicing today, publishing today, who never went near an MFA program. So remember, there are many, many routes to becoming a serious and respected writer. Just to recap, if you crave the mentorship and the community and the structure that an MFA program can provide you, and you can afford the time, effort, and money to do it, then I would advise that you go for it. And if not, then there are many other paths to becoming a writer, and you will just be building your own path as you go. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear from you wherever you are in the process, whatever your thoughts and reflections are on the idea of an MFA program. I would love to know what those are. And if you enjoy the video, please do click on the like button and the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything to do that, but it really helps to grow the channel, so your support is really greatly appreciated. You can also support the channel in other ways, and you can find the links to the Buy Me a Coffee and the Patreon link in the description below. And as always, I will be back very soon with more poetry content.